An exciting selection of world leaders will share their initiatives to accelerate adaptation action. And we will also hear from other important stakeholders, ranging from international organizations, civil society, cities, to the private sector, and science. And of course, we must not forget youth. And let me briefly introduce myself. I'm a photographer with a focus on climate change and the impact it has on people all over the world, like the North Pole. The Inuit I've met there told me about Sila. That's their spirit. That stands for wisdom, the planet, all living creatures, and the weather. And they told me that Sila is confused. Everything is different now from how it was before. And that is what climate change is all about. Climate change is one of the biggest challenges humankind is facing. A task so big, it can be daunting. But the sense of urgency, the recognized opportunity, and the will to act is present here today. Thank you beforehand for sharing your actions and showing leadership. Adaptation is essential. It can and will be done. Well, Prime Minister, welcome, and thank you for hosting this very important summit. Could I start by asking you why this summit is so important for the world and for the Netherlands?
Well, thank you also for presenting this session. And to all participants and viewers around the world, welcome to the first Global Leaders Summit focused solely on climate adaptation. And why this summit? I think it is because climate change, of course, is happening now as we speak. Its social and economic consequences are already affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And as we confront COVID-19 all around the world, we still need to take next action on climate change. Because if we don't adapt, the consequences will be disastrous. We could see a sharp fall in agricultural yields around the world. We could see a sharp increase in the number of people who don't have enough water. Rising seas and bigger storm surges could force hundreds of millions of people in coastal cities from their homes. And if we fail to act, climate change could push more than 100 million people in developing countries below the poverty line by 2030. But also for the Netherlands, for us here too, climate adaptation is a matter of pure survival. A large part of my country lies below sea level, as you know. The Netherlands is a small, densely populated and resourceful country. So we are very ambitious. But we are reaching, at the same time, the limits of what climate, nature, but also the environment can cope with. So business as usual is no longer an option for my country and for many others in the same situation. So we like to share our expertise and to learn from all the others. And that's why I'm so delighted and so excited that so many of you have joined us here today.
Yeah, it's very important to be here today, everybody together. But what kind of big decisions and actions do we need to take?
Well, first of all, let me stress, today is about action. We are bringing together leaders from across the world, from government, from business, from cities, academia, NGOs, as well as other partners. And we have an outstanding opportunity today to discuss how we can recover better, how we can recover stronger and recover together from this crisis. The Global Commission on Adaptation's flagship report, Adapt Now, showed how investing in climate adaptation can deliver many positive returns. Returns in terms of climate safety, resilience, innovation, economic growth, and of course the protection of ecosystems. An investment of $1.8 trillion to scale up climate adaptation over a decade could deliver $7.1 trillion in net benefits. So climate adaptation is the right thing to do. And it's the smart thing to do. So it's good value for money, which is why it makes sense to put adaptation at the heart of the COVID-19 response, as economic recovery will be, I believe, more resilient and more effective with climate adaptation built in. During this summit, public and private sector partners from all over the world will present solutions, actions and best practices on resilient infrastructure, on delta development, on food security, on resilient cities and disaster risk management. And there will be a special focus on the leadership of youth and the adaptive capacity of the African continent. On that issue, I'd like to point out that the Netherlands is ensuring that its development aid is equally focused, so 50-50 on mitigation and adaptation. In 2019, we launched the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, which is using over 160 million euros in public funding to mobilize private investment worth €500 million. It even has a target of 65% for climate adaptation finance. And that's just one example of concrete action and decisions that can help move climate adaptation forward. And I hope that more and more countries will raise their climate financing for adaptation to match their financing for mitigation.
And what are you hoping for going into this summit?
Well, of course, I hope that it will set the world on a path towards action to accelerate adaptation and resilience worldwide. So over the next 24 hours, initiatives from over 50 international partners will be discussed at events taking place across the globe. Each one will contribute to an Adaptation Action Agenda that will help guide us towards a climate-resilient future by 2030. I also hope that 2021 will be a year of heightened international ambition and action on climate change after a very difficult 2020. And that this conference will help achieve that goal. We know that climate impacts will continue to escalate even if we succeed in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that we can only tackle our climate emergency by working together. And I hope this summit can help foster this global cooperation so that we can both combat and adapt to climate change. And finally, I'd like to thank the Global Commission on Adaptation and its convening countries for your hard work and your leadership on climate adaptation. In the 3 years since you started this work, you have helped spearhead initiatives that are helping to create safer and stronger communities around the world. For this and for your selfless dedication, we owe you a major debt of gratitude. So, a heartfelt thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister Rutte. And Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, you are the initiator of this summit. Well, it started a while ago, I believe, but did you ever expect it to go online?
Well, the summit wasn't originally planned to be fully online, of course, but today with COVID, we have no other choice. And climate adaptation is simply too important to postpone this global meeting any longer. So let's all embrace the benefits that are also there. We have a smashing outreach with 30 presidents, prime ministers, heads of state, 50 ministers participating, 300 speakers from all over the world, and about 15,000 registrations. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, and it's a smaller footprint too.
Of course, and no security problems. There are also a lot of benefits.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Your Excellency, you have been a driving force behind adaptation action. What is your hope for this summit?
Well, it's a great pleasure, first of all. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for hosting this very important summit meeting, and also Minister Cora van Zheng. And also I see Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, and I'm also very much honored to participate as a co-chair of this inaugural Climate Adaptation Summit meeting. When I reflect on how we have responded to the global pandemic and what lessons we might have learned these past years, one quality shines through. That is the power of global partnership and collaboration. That's the most important things. In this regard, I'd like to take this opportunity to highly commend the visionary leadership of President Joe Biden of the United States for his decisive action to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement as the first act of his presidency. This means The multilateralism, which has been in disarray during the last 4 years, is now back. Thanks to this spirit of collaboration, we now have promising pathways back to health. If we can do this to fight the pandemic, we can certainly do this and more to help hundreds of millions of people adapt to the accelerating impacts of climate change. We need to start building a better future now. The Paris Agreement recognized that mitigation and adaptation go hand in hand, that they are two equally important building blocks towards a sustainable world that leaves no one behind. Over the past 2 years, the Global Commission on Adaptation has worked hard to elevate the importance of climate adaptation. That work will now be succeeded by the Global Center on Adaptation, based in the Netherlands and led by my very able colleague, Dr. Patrick Vercoyen. The GCA's inaugural State and Trends in Adaptation report focused on the context of COVID-19. It stated that we need a 5 to 10-fold increase in funding for adaptation for just the developing world, and yet only a tiny fraction of the trillions of dollars in economic stimulus funds announced so far are being earmarked for climate adaptation. That we have to increase. The main three pillars of our summit is that raise ambition, increase, mobilize finance, as well as forge a partnership. We need a step change in adaptation to protect the world, and especially the most vulnerable people and countries from climate impact. Those of us gathered here today are in the best place to deliver it. The world has a golden opportunity to recover from our health and economic crisis by accelerating adaptation, and we must seize it. You have, I think all of us, global leaders, have a political and moral responsibility to save humanity and our planet. I sincerely hope that with all this multilateralism returning back, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, you really take this opportunity to change the world. And I count on your strong leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And let's indeed talk to your successor at the United Nations, Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Your Excellency, we are delighted that you are able to join us live. Welcome. On December 12th, the world celebrated the 5th anniversary already of the Paris Agreement, and we have already seen a lot of commitments on getting to net zero. Do you think we are going fast enough when it comes to adapting to a climate that's changing so fast?
Not yet fast enough, but Excellencies, dear friends, I thank Prime Minister Mark Rutte, Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, and my dear friend Ban Ki-moon for inviting me to address this important summit. And I thank the Global Commission on Adaptation for its leadership. We begin this year with a heightened awareness of the importance of resilience. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us that we cannot afford to ignore known risks. And climate disruption is a risk we are well aware of. The science has never been clearer. We are facing a climate emergency, and we are already witnessing unprecedented climate extremes and volatility affecting lives and livelihoods on all continents. According to the World Meteorological Organization, there have been more than 11,000 disasters due to weather, climate and water-related hazards over the past 50 years at a cost of some $3.6 trillion. Extreme weather and climate-related hazards have also killed more than 410,000 people in the past decade, the vast majority in low and lower middle-income countries. And this is why I have called for a breakthrough on adaptation and resilience. We need the trillions of taxpayers' dollars funding the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic to jumpstart the low-carbon, high-resilience future we need. But recovery cannot be only for the developed world. We must expand the provision of liquidity and debt relief instruments to developing and middle-income countries that lack the resources to relaunch their economies in a sustainable and inclusive way. And I see 5 priorities to guarantee adaptation and resilience. First, donor countries and multilateral, regional and national development banks need to significantly increase the volume and predictability of their finance for adaptation and resilience. The recent United Nations Environment Programme Adaptation Gap Report calculates annual adaptation costs in developing countries alone to be in the range of $70 billion. These figures are likely to reach 100 to 140 or eventually up to $300 billion in 2030, and the range between 280 and 500 billion in 2050. But huge gaps remain on financing for adaptation in developing countries. That is why I've called for 50% of the total share of climate finance provided by all developed countries and multilateral development banks to be allocated to adaptation and resilience in developing countries. Adaptation cannot be the neglected half of the climate equation. The African Development Bank set the bar in 2019 by allocating over half of its climate finance to adaptation. And I urge all donors and multilateral development banks to commit to this goal by COP26 and deliver on it at least by 2024. And I welcome today's commitment made by Prime Minister Mark Rutte on behalf of the government of the Netherlands. Let us remember that developed countries must meet the commitments made in the Paris Agreement to mobilize $100 billion a year from private and public sources for mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. Second, all budget allocations and investment decisions need to be climate resilient. Climate risk must be embedded in all procurement processes, particularly for infrastructure. And developing countries must receive the necessary support and the tools to achieve this. The United Nations system is ready to support this effort worldwide. Third, we need to significantly scale up existing catastrophe-triggered financial instruments, such as the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility and the African Risk Capacity. And I call also on donors, the multilateral development banks, and private finance institutions to work with vulnerable countries on developing new instruments with innovation to incentivize investments in resilience building. For every dollar invested in climate resilient infrastructure, $6 can be saved, as Prime Minister Mark Rutte just said. Fourth, we need to ease access to finance, especially for the most vulnerable, and expand debt relief initiatives. The share for least developed countries and small island developing states in total climate finance remains small, representing only 14% and 2% of flows respectively. And these countries stand on the line of the climate crisis. Yet, due to size and capacity constraints, they face significant challenges in accessing climate finance to build resilience. There must be a collective effort to remove these obstacles. And finally, we need to support regional adaptation and resilience initiatives. This would allow, for example, debt for adaptation swaps, for example, for the Caribbean or the Pacific Islands, and provide much needed liquidity to vulnerable countries in dire need. Excellencies and dear friends, support for adaptation and resilience is a moral, economic, and social imperative. Today, 1 person in 3 is still not adequately covered by early warning systems, and risk-informed early approaches are not at the scale required. As illustrated by the Global Commission on Adaptation, just 24 hours warning of a coming storm or heat wave can cut the ensuing damage by 30%. We need to work together to ensure full global coverage by early warning systems to help minimize these losses. We have the tools, skills, and opportunities to deliver more, faster, and better adaptation actions. I hope this summit helps to secure the breakthrough on adaptation and resilience that is needed, and that it leads to ambitious outcomes at COP26. Let us live up to our responsibilities and jointly change course towards a sustainable, fair, and resilient future And I thank you.
And I thank you, Secretary General Guterres, and stay with us, please. Well, let's move to Africa, where climate change is felt on a daily basis. President Akufo-Addo from Ghana, Your Excellency, thank you very much for sharing your action. Can you hear us? President
Yes,
Akufo-Addo, can you hear us?
Me?
Could you share your action with us,
Yes, I can
please?
hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
You hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. All right. Okay.
Please share your actions with us, if you can.
All right. Okay. Your Excellencies, as co-chair of the United Nations Eminent Group of Advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm delighted to join you this afternoon virtually for this historic Climate Adaptation Summit. I thank my good friend, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency, for the honor of this invitation. The climate crisis is wrecking lives and livelihoods and disproportionately affecting the poor and the most vulnerable in society. Amid the existential threat posed by climate change, this summit comes at a time when our world is faced with one of its toughest challenges yet, the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a challenge we must not only confront head-on, but one from which we must emerge as victors. It is vital that we are united in action and do all we can as soon as possible to save lives, restore livelihoods, and spur the growth of our economies. While ensuring this, it is incumbent on all of us to help protect our communities from future health, economic, and climate change shocks. In Ghana, we're committed to promoting climate adaptation action. And that is why we're pleased to be collaborating with the Global Center on Adaptation, in close collaboration with the African Development Bank, in pioneering solutions on how to build durable infrastructure and supporting African cities to guard against the impacts of climate change. We're also working with the private sector and with the assistance of the Green Climate Fund to establish a multi-million-dollar green fund to support our climate adaptation interventions and our efforts to transition to renewable energy. We expect these initiatives to deliver tangible progress towards Ghana's adaptation and development objectives. By laying the foundation now, we bestow to future generations stronger, safer, and healthier communities. Young people have done the least to cause climate change, and yet will suffer its impact the most. Across Africa, the continent with the world's youngest population, we must scale up the solutions that deliver green jobs and resilient livelihoods. It is for them and future generations that we must all come together and use this summit as a turning point to create a more prosperous, greener, and fairer world. We cannot fail in this endeavor, as success is the greatest inheritance that we can leave for the current and future generations. I thank Your Excellencies for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you. Over to our neighbor, Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany. She has sent us a video message about Germany's adaptations and reduction measures.
Sehr geehrter Herr Premierminister, sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Wir wissen und wir sehen es. Der Klimawandel gefährdet unsere Umwelt, unsere Wirtschaft, unsere Sicherheit überall auf der Welt. Aber gemeinsam haben wir es in der Hand, die Folgen einzudämmen. Davon bin ich überzeugt. Daher entwickelt Deutschland seine 2008 beschlossene Anpassungsstrategie an den Klimawandel regelmäßig weiter. Parallel dazu setzen wir unseren Weg der Emissionsminderungen in Richtung Klimaneutralität fort. Auch bei unserer internationalen Klimafinanzierung verfolgen wir sowohl Anpassungs- als auch Minderungsmaßnahmen. Dabei machen wir uns insbesondere stark für Klimarisikofinanzierungen und Versicherungen. Hierfür haben wir auch unseren jeweiligen Vorsitz der G7 und G20 in den vergangenen Jahren intensiv genutzt. Multilateral wird die Bundesregierung ihr Engagement weiter ausbauen und bilateral werden wir weitere 120 Millionen Euro investieren. So unterstützen wir auch die globale Partnerschaft Ensure Resilience, ihrem Ziel gerecht zu werden, bis 2025 insgesamt 500 Millionen besonders arme und gefährdete Menschen abzusichern gegen Klimarisiken wie Ernteausfälle oder Überschwemmungen. Deutschland sieht sich in der Mitverantwortung, die Resilienz armer und ärmster Länder zu stärken. Daher haben wir im Dezember zusätzliche 50 Millionen Euro für den Anpassungsfonds zugesagt, der den Zugang von Entwicklungsländern zu internationaler Klimafinanzierung verbessert. Deutschland wird auch weitere 100 Millionen Euro für den Fonds für die am wenigsten entwickelten Länder zur Verfügung stellen. Dem Klimawandel und seinen Folgen entgegenzuwirken, fällt leichter im Vertrauen darauf, dass wir weltweit partnerschaftlich an einem Strang ziehen. Für Deutschland kann ich sagen, wir packen mit an.
Thank you, Chancellor Merkel, for sharing your action. Well, when it comes to climate change, the annual COPs, the Conference of the Parties, the climate negotiations, are essential. They are the moments that define the global ambitions. And allow me to introduce His Excellency, President Sebastian Pinera from Chile, COP25 President. Welcome, President.
Good afternoon, my colleagues and friends. Each generation has its own challenges and missions. But no generation has faced such an urgent and formidable challenge as climate change and global warming, and such a great mission as survival. This is the battle of our lifetime. The human being is the smartest and more ingenious creature living on planet Earth, and yet it's the only one capable of destroying its own planet, our only planet, our planet Earth. Some people are skeptical about climate change and global warming, but the scientific evidence is overwhelming. We know too much to remain skeptical. The concentration of greenhouse gases and global temperature is the highest in the past 8,000 years. This is not a matter of opinion, ideology, or faith. It's a matter of facts and science. We need to take bold action and tackle the root of the problem, reduce our emission and increase our capture of greenhouse gases. This is why Chile pledges to become a carbon neutral country before 2050. But at the same time, we must adapt to this new climate reality. Adaptation is not an option. It's an urgent task for the benefit of this generation and those to come. Chile is fully committed to this endeavor. During our COP25 presidency, we pushed for a strong recognition of adaptation as a top priority in the global response to climate change. I would like to highlight 4 points. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that as we fight this sanitary, social, and economic crisis, we cannot forget that adaptation to climate change needs to remain in the core of our agenda. The climate crisis continues and is affecting the most vulnerable groups in our society. We need to make sure that our economic recovery policies are in line with our climate policies to build a greener and more sustainable and resilient future. We must strengthen our capacity to anticipate future crises through early action and multilateral cooperation. In 2020, Chile was one of the first countries in the world to put forward a more ambitious National Determined Contribution, NDC. In our new NDC, we put adaptation at the heart of our commitments. We presented an ambitious adaptation plan that covers 11 sectors of our economy. And today we are working to include adaptation in our long-term climate strategy, which we will present in Glasgow during COP26. Chile has made an extraordinary effort to identify the climate vulnerability across our territory. Therefore, we created a climate risk map. This is a crucial tool to implement new policies which address local needs, takes account of the particularities of our geography, culture, and local economic circumstances. We believe that future climate risks should be part of decisions on investment plans and economic recovery. This is why our NDC includes a financial strategy that aims to mainstream adaptation in the decision-making process of the financial sector. Thank you, and I would like to reiterate the commitment of Chile to the Global Commission on Adaptation and the hard work we have ahead. To sum up, science has spoken loud and clear. Our citizens are urging us to change course. Technology provides us with the tools. It's time to change the course of history. It's time for action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Pinera. Yeah, Mr. Rutte, you want to react?
Just because there are a few fascinating red threads going through these presentations. And one of them, of course, is the, as Antonio Guterres said, the moral, the economic and the social imperative. And the President of Chile saying the urgency of now. So that's one. Another one Antonio Guterres was stressing, and I forgot this in my introduction, is the issue of the small island development states. And I know this is very close to your heart, Mr. Secretary General. As we all know, the Netherlands is only one country in Europe and 3 countries in the Caribbean. And they all face these issues of small island development states being confronted by climate change and the need for climate adaptation. A third one, also stressed by the President of Ghana, is the issue of young people, who have only contributed very little to this problem, but they will be confronted with it to a large extent. And I visited Ghana in 2017 together with Emmanuel Macron, and I know that it's very close to the heart of the President of Ghana. And finally, both Germany, Angela Merkel, but also the President of Chile, stressing this issue of how the G20, the G7, the mainstreaming also financially, how we have to do this. So I think there are a couple of red threads now going through these presentations, which are already very interesting. I'm really keenly looking forward to the others.
Very good. Well, let's continue then. Because with the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021, COP26, as the President Pinera already mentioned, and many more climate-related events later this year, 2021, promises to be an important year for climate ambition. And well, let me introduce COP26 President. He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Boris Johnson.
Stopping climate change 10, 20 or however many years from now can't and must not be the limit of our ambition. Because when we look to Bangladesh and see more powerful and more frequent storms and cyclones, when we look to California, Australia, and see soaring temperatures and raging wildfires, when we look to the island nations of the Pacific and see whole communities submerged by rising seas, we cannot deny that dramatic climate change is already happening, already devastating lives and economies. And because prevention is not only better than cure, it's cheaper too. If we fail to act in 2021, then by 2030, the annual bill for adaptation in developing countries alone will have reached as high as $300 billion. I'll be making the need for a more resilient recovery a priority of the UK's G7 presidency this year. And to make sure we get not just warm words, but real change, I'm today launching an all-new Adaptation Action Coalition, which is a joint effort between the UK, Bangladesh, Egypt, Malawi, the Netherlands, St. Lucia, and the United Nations. This coalition will draw on the expertise of businesses, scientists, civil society, and more, working with the Race to Resilience and the UN High-Level Climate Champions team to build on 2019's call for action on adaptation and setting the agenda ahead of COP26 later this year. So, let 2021 be the year that we fight back, not just against climate change, but the effects of climate change that are already being felt.
Thank you, Prime Minister Johnson. And it brings us to Prime Minister Modi from India, who during the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019 announced a global coalition on resilient infrastructures.
Adaptation is more significant today than ever before. And it is a key element for India's development efforts. We have promised ourselves that we will not just meet our Paris Agreement targets, but exceed them. We will not just arrest environmental degradation, but reverse it. And we will not just create new capacities, but make them an agent for global good. we are going to restore 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. We are providing clean cooking fuel to 80 million rural households. We are connecting 64 million households to pipe water supply. And our initiatives have not been restricted to India alone. The International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure shows the power of global climate partnership. I invite all of you to the 3rd International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure later this year in India. Excellency, if we take care of Mother Earth, she will continue to nurture us. This sentiment should guide our way forward. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Modi. Well, earlier, we heard Secretary General Guterres share that unlocking more adaptation finance is essential. Investing in adaptation will indeed save money in the long run, as it is more expensive to build back. We've asked leaders on their views. First, President Macron from France. Let's listen to his statement.
L'adaptation et la résilience sont en effet des mots qui ont résonné avec force et gravité ces derniers mois. Et la crise de la Covid-19 que nous sommes en train de vivre et qui secoue encore la planète tout entière a montré plus que jamais à quel point il est crucial de protéger les populations face aux chocs et leur permettre de s'en relever. Le changement climatique est l'un de ces chocs qui nous concernent tous, dont les impacts se manifestent et s'intensifient partout. C'est pourquoi il nous faut, dans l'esprit de l'accord de Paris, faire preuve d'ambition et de solidarité. Il en va de notre responsabilité à tous et de notre responsabilité à chacun. Mais il est tout aussi important d'accélérer la mise en œuvre d'actions d'adaptation sur le terrain afin de réduire la vulnérabilité de nos sociétés. Au niveau international, la France poursuit ses engagements en matière de solidarité climatique. L'Agence française de développement a déjà multiplié par 4 son soutien financier à l'adaptation depuis 2016. Et comme je m'y suis engagé le 12 décembre dernier, lors du sommet de l'ambition climatique, la France rehaussera le niveau de finances climat à plus de 6 milliards d'euros par an. Elle consacrera un tiers de celle-ci à l'adaptation. La France joue par ailleurs tout son rôle pour aider à la mobilisation au niveau mondial des financements publics et privés sur le sujet de l'adaptation. Lors du sommet Finances en commun, nous avons lancé une coalition de 450 banques publiques de développement qui se sont engagées pour la première fois à intégrer l'adaptation et la résilience dans leurs stratégies et opérations. Elles se sont également engagées à renforcer l'action pour financer l'élaboration et la mise en œuvre de plans nationaux d'adaptation. Au nord comme au sud, il nous faut repenser les infrastructures, les routes, les ports, à l'aune de l'élévation du niveau de la mer, des événements climatiques violents, de la hausse des températures moyennes et des transformations d'écosystèmes que cela engendre. Tout cela est la meilleure manière de prévoir les prochains chocs, de lutter contre les grandes transformations qui sont déjà à l'œuvre et aussi d'avoir une action utile et coordonnée contre les grandes inégalités de nos sociétés et à travers le monde. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, President Macron, for your contribution. The world is enhancing ambition on climate change, on ensuring we adapt. And I would like to introduce Mr. Han Zheng, Vice Premier of the People's Republic of China.
尊敬的吕特首相，各位同事、女士们、先生们、朋友们，很高兴出席首届气候适应峰会。气候变化是全人类面临的共同挑战，应对气候变化需要统筹兼顾、减缓和适应。这次峰会的举办，对于凝聚各方共识、推进全球气候适应行动合作具有重要意义。中国国家主席习近平在第75届联合国大会一般性辩论上宣布，中国二氧化碳排放力争于2030年前达到峰值，努力争取2060年前实现碳中和。在气候雄心峰会上， 习近平主席进一步宣布中国提高国家自主贡献力度的新举措，展现了我们应对气候变化的信心和决心。中国一贯坚持减缓和适应并重原则，通过实施国家适应气候变化战略，开展自然灾害预警预报，提高防灾减灾能力，加强农林水利基础设施建设，在主动适应气候变化方面做了大量卓有成效的工作。目前，中国正在编制国家适应气候变化战略2035，将进一步强化国内适应气候变化的工作，全面提高气候风险抵御能力。女士们、先生们、朋友们，5年前，巴黎协定确定了全球适应目标，明确了对发展中国家适应行动的支持，为全球气候治理描绘了新愿景。今年是巴黎协定全面实施之年，在此，我仅提出3点倡议：第一，脚踏实地，主动落实巴黎协定。适应气候变化是发展中国家最为直接和迫切的要求。发达国家应当按照巴黎协定，切实加大对发展中国家适应气候变化的资金和技术支持。第二，加大力度，提升适应气候变化水平。各国应当根据自身实际情况，制定并执行国家适应计划，扩大适应行动的规模，增强适应行动的有效性和持久性，促进可持续发展。第三，精诚合作，形成适应气候变化强大合力。我们要树立你中有我，我中有你的命运共同体意识，坚持多边主义，开展适应气候变化国际合作，推动全球和平发展合作共赢。女士们、先生们、朋友们，我们生活在同一个地球村，各国紧密相连，人类命运与共。让我们团结一心，共同强化适应行动，携手推进全球气候治理新进程。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Vice Premier Han. And now, a very warm welcome to our next speaker. This must be one of his first international contributions as the newly appointed Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Secretary John Kerry. Welcome, Mr. Kerry. Very good to have you. Welcome to this virtual meeting of world leaders. It is truly wonderful to have you. Could you please tell us about the new ambitions of the United States?
Absolutely, and thank you. It's a privilege to be able to be with you. And let me start by thanking Prime Minister Rutte and the government of the Netherlands for hosting this important and timely meeting. I'm really delighted to be here. Also want to thank, if I may, Secretary General Guterres for his tireless leadership on climate change, and of course my friend Ban Ki-moon, who was central as we negotiated the Paris Agreement and brought it into force. And he's been a partner not just on climate, but on many other things and challenges. 3 years ago, scientists gave us a pretty stark warning. They said we have 12 years within which to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Now we have 9 years left, and I regret that my country has been absent for 3 of those years. In the United States, we spent $265 billion in 1 year for 3 storms, just cleaning up after those storms. Last year, 1 storm, $55 billion. We've reached the point where it is an absolute fact that it's cheaper to invest in preventing damage, or minimizing it at least, than cleaning up. Now, without question, I think everybody understands this, the best adaptation is to treat the crisis as the emergency that it is and do more to hold the Earth's temperature increase to the Paris stated 1.5 degrees. And I think scientists are more and more landing on the 1.5 as a critical figure. A 3.7 to 4.5 increase centigrade, which is exactly the path that we are on now, invites for the most vulnerable and poorest people on Earth fundamentally unlivable conditions. So our urgent reduction of emissions is compelled by public conscience and by common sense. President Biden has made fighting climate change a top priority of his administration. We have a president now, thank God, who leads, tells the truth, and is seized by this issue. And President Biden knows that we have to mobilize in unprecedented ways to meet a challenge that is fast accelerating. And he knows we have limited time to get it under control. For that reason, the United States immediately rejoined the Paris Agreement, and we intend to do everything we possibly can to ensure that COP26 results in ambitious climate action in which all major emitter countries raise ambition significantly and in which we help protect those who are the most vulnerable. We have already launched our work to prepare a new U.S. nationally determined contribution that meets the urgency of the challenge, and we aim to announce our NDC as soon as practicable. The administration also intends to make significant investments in climate action, both domestically and as part of our efforts to build back better from COVID. And internationally, we intend to make good on our climate finance pledge. In the long term, driving towards net zero emissions no later than 2050 and keeping a 1.5 degree limit within reach remain the best policies for climate resilience and adaptation. There is simply no adapting to a 3 or 4 degree world except for the very richest and most privileged. At the same time, we have to also build resilience to protect communities from the impacts of climate change that are already built in to the emissions that are in the atmosphere. Now, some of these impacts are inevitable because of the warming that's already taken place. But if we don't act boldly and immediately by building resilience to climate change, we are likely going to see dramatic reversals in economic development for everybody. Poor and climate vulnerable communities everywhere will obviously pay the highest price. So the United States will work on 3 fronts to promote ambition and resilience on adaptation. Leverage U.S. innovation and climate data and information to promote a better understanding and management of climate risk, especially in developed countries. We will significantly increase the flow of finance, including concessional finance, to adaptation and resilience initiatives. We will work with bilateral and multilateral institutions to improve the quality of resilience programming. And we will work with the private sector in the United States and elsewhere in developing countries to promote greater collaboration between businesses and the communities on which they depend. And it is our firm conviction throughout all of our administration, every agency is now part of our climate team. And only together are we going to be able to build the resilience to climate change that is critical to save lives and meet our moral obligation to future generations and to those currently living in very difficult circumstances. So we're proud to be back. We come back, I want you to know, with humility for the absence of the last 4 years, and we'll do everything in our power to make up for it.
Well, Mr. Kerry, it's wonderful to have you back. Thank you very much. And the world is grateful for the reinstatement of climate ambition from the USA. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Rutte, what do you say?
Well, Sasha, I'm so happy to hear John Kerry say this, because we need the US to be back at the center of the action. We need the leadership of the United States, European Union, China, Asia, because otherwise we can never cope with this. And I think also, interestingly, there were 2 themes coming through the previous presentations. One is about coalition building. And we heard Prime Minister Boris Johnson talk about coalitions around the globe, from Egypt through to Bangladesh.
And also with the Netherlands, by the way.
Absolutely, and the Netherlands. And we are close friends. Then we heard Narendra Modi. He spoke about coalitions built around themes like infrastructure and, for example, water resilient infrastructure. And China the Vice Prime Minister of China talking about the need for China to particularly help in the developing countries, for example in Africa, where they can add value. And we heard Emmanuel Macron. This was another theme coming through, which is that we need to spend money not only on mitigation but also on adaptation. And France now committing to spend 1/3 of its overall climate investments on adaptation, which is a fantastic commitment. So I think this was a great round of speakers, and particularly to have the US back at the center is fantastic news.
Thank you, thank you. Well, we cannot discuss finance, of course, without the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and its managing director, Kristalina Georgieva. Ms. Georgieva, you have been one of the biggest drivers on climate financing. How can we scale up adaptation finance?
First, many thanks to Prime Minister Rutte for bringing us in this special moment. And since I'm the first to take the floor after John Kerry, warm welcome to the United States back in the Paris Agreement. To tackle this grave challenge of climate change, we need all hands on deck. And certainly the US is so critical for success. Saying all hands on deck, that also means international organization playing our role. For us at the IMF, we see climate as a fundamental risk to economic and financial stability. And we see climate action as an opportunity to reinvigorate growth, especially after the pandemic, and to generate new green jobs. So for us, it is mission critical. Our research shows that if we combine rising carbon prices with the green infrastructure push to bring emissions down and adapt to climate change, we can boost global GDP over the next 15 years by 0.7% higher growth, and we will create millions of new green jobs. So what does action mean for us at the IMF? First, integrating climate in our annual country economic assessment. They're known in the world as Article 4 consultations. In highly vulnerable countries, we focus on adaptation, and we are also building up mitigation analysis, including carbon pricing in our assessment of large emitters. Second, including climate-related financial stability risks in our financial sector surveillance through standardized disclosure of these risks, enhanced stress tests, and assessments of supervisory framework. Make the money go where they must. Third, scaling up climate in our capacity development so we can help equip finance ministries and central banks with the skills needed to take climate considerations into account. And fourth, mainstream climate indicators in macroeconomic data. Unless we do it, we won't take that important shift. So this year, we are going to launch a climate change dashboard, indicators to track the economic impact of climate risks and the measures taken to mitigate them. So let me finish. Climate resilience is a critical priority, and this is why we place it at the heart of what we do this year and in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Kristalina Georgieva from IMF. Well, let's go to the other side of the world, to Gabon. President Bongo, his country has been a leading example in climate ambition in Africa.
Prime Minister Rutte, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, co-chairs of the Global Adaptation Summit, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The devastating effects of climate change are on the rise, especially on the African continent. Unchecked, climate change would create hundreds of millions of climate refugees in Africa by the middle of the century. In response to that challenge, African heads of state launched the Africa Adaptation Initiative, AAI, at COP21 in Paris. Our objective was to ensure that the continent urgently adapts to the adverse effects of climate change. Today, the COVID-19 crisis is eroding our hard-earned developmental gains, as well as adding fuel to the continent's existing climate crisis. Still, Africa has no choice but to adapt and chart a climate-resilient future. As the champion of the Africa Adaptation Initiative, I have taken the lead to accelerate action by committing domestic financial resources to AAI and by promoting strategic partnership. Therefore, I'm extremely pleased to see the strong collaboration emerging between the AAI and the Global Center on Adaptation, GCA, which has just been formalized by signing an MOU between the GCA and AAI, with the GCA as the AAI leads coordination partner. GCA will work to implement the vision and roadmaps of the AAI.
Thank you very much, President Bongo. Next to Grenada, Grenada is a small island development state. Welcome, Prime Minister of Grenada, Keith Mitchell.
It is my pleasure to participate in this summit, convened at a time when the global community is reeling under the combined effects of COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, biodiversity loss, and socioeconomic stagnation. It is heartening to see that as a global community, we are all on board, committing to such action. I am therefore pleased to say today that Grenada has delivered on its climate adaptation and mitigation commitments through its National Adaptation Plan, its second nationally determined contributions, and its National Sustainable Development Plan 2020 to 2035. Through our flagship adaptation project, Climate Resilience in the Water Sector, Grenada has embarked on the total transformation of the sector with the kind support of the Green Climate Fund and GIZ. We are also developing a Smart Cities Adaptation Project, which we hope will serve as a model for small island developing states. Combining our ambitious climate adaptation actions with support from our development partners, including our collaboration with the Global Center on Adaptation, will determine our success in facing the unprecedented global crisis and developing sustainable recovery for the benefit of future generations.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Keith Mitchell. Well, we heard from the powerful initiative from the IMF to change the financial system, but systematic change is needed from many multilateral institutions. We are joined by Mr. David Malpass, the President of the World Bank Group. President Malpass, thank you for joining. May I ask you to share your views?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prime Minister Rutte, Secretaries General, Your Excellencies. The World Bank recognizes and appreciates the Netherlands' leadership and expertise on adaptation. I've previously described the World Bank Group's broader efforts on climate finance, where the World Bank is the largest multilateral funder, is at record funding levels, and is committed to increasing further. I'll focus today on action on adaptation, which is a core activity in the World Bank Group's development activities. Our financing for adaptation increased from 40% of climate finance in 2016 to over 50% in 2020, and we've committed to making it half of our total climate finance for the next 5 years. I'd like to give some examples of tangible outcomes. In 6 West African countries, we're working to protect against coastal erosion, restore wetlands and mangroves, and build seawalls and dikes. In Niger, we're working to improve the management of agricultural lands and increase crop yields. In Mozambique, we're building resilient roads and transport links in response to recent devastating cyclones. This is critical so that people can access health services and farmers can get their crops to market. And in 11 countries across Africa's dry lands, the World Bank Group plans to invest over $5 billion over the next 5 years to improve livelihoods and restore degradation. This investment is a major contribution to the Great Green Wall. In small island states across the Caribbean, Pacific, and Africa, we support risk management readiness operations and deferred drawdown options. These help countries build institutions and strategies to handle national emergencies caused by natural disasters and to access instant funding when disasters strike. And beyond providing direct finance, we're taking steps to strengthen resilience in our projects. We're boosting capacity to respond to shocks by investing in better social protection systems, weather observation systems, and early warning and evacuation systems. These are particularly valuable for the small island states. Our goal is to help keep communities safe and help them develop in ways that are resilient during climate change. We look forward to working closely with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Malpass. Well, what do you say? It's huge investments.
Absolutely, and this is a commitment which the World Bank has made previously, but now it is happening. The 50% is a huge target, but it is also, I think, helping with a few of the common themes coming through the last 4 presentations. Both the President of Gabon and the Prime Minister of Grenada stressing the need to implement at a national level what they are doing in terms of commitment on adaptation and mitigation. And the World Bank is crucial here to help with this knowledge. I know the World Bank is also helping the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the Caribbean in some of the rebuilding efforts we are doing at the moment, and that's crucial help. Another common theme is from Kristalina Georgieva. She is a fantastic leader and has always stressed in all her roles previously and also in this capacity that there is a huge opportunity for growth, economic growth, coming out of green jobs. My personal vision for the Netherlands is that by 2030, building back better after COVID-19, we will see that from the 10 million jobs we have now in the Netherlands, that probably a quarter to maybe 1/3 of those jobs will be in professions we don't even know of yet. So we have now to invest in a way in our innovation portfolio, in our capacity for research and development. And this is true not only for developed countries, but also for developing countries, to make sure that not only we make our world adaptive to what is happening in terms of climate change, but also to create those green jobs and future business opportunities which will lead to more overall wealth for our country. So there is a huge opportunity, and Kristalina, thanks for your leadership in showing us the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rutte. And now I've heard, Mr. Guterres, you have to leave us now, unfortunately. I hope you're not looking surprised now, but thank you very much for joining us. You were a very honored guest to have you. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, thank you very much for joining us this last hour.
Thank you very much and congratulations. A remarkable summit. Thank you very much.
Antonio. See you next time.
Thank you very much. Well, we have just listened to government leaders, multilateral development banks and international institutions, all committing to action and showing what can and should be done. But there are more stakeholders for action. Last Friday, in the Netherlands city of Groningen, only the Dutch can pronounce this well, I believe, Groningen, youth and science shared their call to action.
People and organizations from all over the world participated in the Dutch Climate Adaptation Week Groningen from the 19th until the 25th of January 2021. An intense, interactive online program invited participants to join forces. Merely by cooperating, we can produce smart solutions to accelerate climate adaptation. An urgent call with no time to lose, especially for the most vulnerable regions of the world. Main deliverables of the Climate Adaptation Week Groningen. 1. The Science Declaration. The University of Groningen invited scientists from all over the world to unite in a joint appeal to our world leaders. It calls to manage and protect natural ecosystems, work on a long-term revolution with regard to public and private investments, to accelerate climate adaptation, and last but not least, to invest in education. 2. The Global Youth Call to Action. Young people around the world are calling for climate justice, as well as more social and economic equality. It's their future as well as their children's future. Our youth calls upon governments and all stakeholders to implement the global call to action on adaptation, in addition to the mitigation efforts and Paris Agreement targets, in order to secure a healthy, safe and green future. 3. The Manifesto for Climate Adaptive Design, in which 9 international design agencies come up with 10 design principles on how to successfully approach climate adaptive design of public space and landscape in Groningen and in the rest of the world. Groningen reaches out to every city and region in the world because climate adaptation is a joint responsibility. We must continue to act and adapt. It's what we do.